They said it was a routine stop. They said she resisted. They said the officers feared for their lives. But they were all lies. They didn't know who they had just crossed. They didn't know that the 16-year-old girl they beat into a coma, a girl named Nia, had a mother named Brenda. And Brenda wasn't just a grieving mother. She was a storm that would tear through their blue wall of silence, expose their darkest secrets, and bring an entire corrupt police department crashing down. This isn't just a story of injustice. It's a story of a mother's vengeance. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Brenda was already in bed, the soft glow of her tablet casting a pale light on the ceiling. She'd been scrolling through old photos, smiling at a picture of her daughter Nia at her 8th grade graduation. Nia with her wide, intelligent eyes and a smile that could disarm armies. At 16, that smile was still her signature, though now it was often accompanied by a teenage eye roll, a sign of budding independence that Brenda cherished and dreaded in equal measure. The voice on the other end of the line was clipped professional and devoid of any real warmth. "Ma'am, this is Northgate General Hospital. We have your daughter, Nia Jackson." Brenda's heart seized. "Is she okay? What happened? Was there an accident?" A slight pause. "There was an incident with the Northgate police. You should come to the hospital." The drive was a blur of streetlights smearing across her tear-filled vision. The emergency room was a cacophony of beeps, hushed voices, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. A doctor with weary eyes and a kind face finally led her to a private room. And there she was, her Nia, swallowed by a hospital bed, a web of tubes and wires, tethering her to the humming machines that were keeping her alive. Her face, the beautiful face Brenda knew better than her own, was a grotesque mask of purple and black bruises. One eye was swollen completely shut. A thick bandage was wrapped around her head. "What happened to my baby?" Brenda whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. The doctor cleared his throat. "Severe head trauma, multiple contusions, 2 broken ribs. We've had to induce a coma to manage the swelling in her brain. The next 48 hours are critical." 2 police officers stood by the door, their expressions carefully neutral. They were not the officers who had done this to her child. These were fresh-faced, their youth a stark contrast to the grim reality of the room. The senior officer, a man with a name tag that read Peterson, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low monotone. "Your daughter was stopped by officers Miller and Rodriguez. She matched the description of a suspect in a series of local burglaries. According to their report, she became aggressive and resisted arrest. A struggle ensued and she sustained injuries while being subdued." Brenda turned from her daughter's still form to stare at the officer. The words felt like shards of glass in her ears. Nia. Aggressive Nia, who volunteered at the animal shelter, who tutored younger kids in math, who cried during sad movies. It was a lie, a monstrous, impossible lie. "Where is their report?" Brenda demanded, her voice shaking with a rage that was starting to eclipse her grief. "I want to see it. I want to see the body cam footage." Officer Peterson exchanged a glance with his partner. "The report is still being processed, ma'am. As for the footage, there were some technical difficulties with the cameras." Technical difficulties. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the oldest excuse in the book, a threadbare blanket used to cover a multitude of sins. In that moment, something inside Brenda shifted. The terror and the sorrow were still there, a howling tempest in her soul, but a new feeling was rising to meet it, a cold, hard certainty. They were lying. They had beaten her daughter half to death, and now they were closing ranks, confident that their badges would shield them from the consequences. The official story, when it finally emerged a day later, was even more insulting. It painted Nia as a belligerent, foul-mouthed suspect who had lunged for an officer's weapon. Officer Daniel Miller, a 10-year veteran with a history of complaints, and his partner, Officer Frank Rodriguez, a younger, more impressionable cop, claimed they had acted in self-defense. They were heroes, the report implied, who had narrowly survived a violent encounter. They were back on patrol within a week. Brenda sat by Nia's bedside, holding her daughter's limp hand, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the only soundtrack to her nightmare. She listened to the doctor's cautious updates and the nurse's sympathetic platitudes. She listened to the whispers in the hallway about the unfortunate incident. But most of all, she listened to the silence from the Northgate Police Department. A silence that screamed of guilt, of conspiracy, and of a deep systemic rot. They thought she was just another grieving mother, helpless and broken. They thought she would eventually tire, accept the pittance of a settlement their city attorneys would offer, and quietly fade away. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had shattered Brenda's world, but in doing so, they had forged her grief into a weapon. Staring at her daughter's battered face, Brenda made a silent vow. They had put her child in a coma. She would put their whole rotten department in a grave. In the days that followed, Brenda operated on a fuel of caffeine and fury. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, a temporary surrender she refused to make. Her life narrowed to 2 locations: the intensive care unit at Northgate General and the suffocating confines of her small apartment, which she had converted into a war room. The dining table was buried under stacks of paper medical records. She'd requested printouts of city ordinances and every news article she could find about the Northgate Police Department. Her first official move was to file a formal complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division. She walked into the Northgate Municipal Building, a sterile, imposing structure of concrete and glass that felt more like a fortress than a public space. The officer at the front desk directed her to a small, windowless office at the end of a long, drab hallway. The man behind the desk, a Detective Murphy, had a soft, doughy face and eyes that seemed perpetually bored. He listened to her story with a practiced patience, his pen making lazy circles on a notepad. "We take these allegations very seriously, Mrs. Jackson," he said, his tone suggesting the exact opposite. He handed her a multi-page form. "Fill this out completely. Be as detailed as possible. An investigation will be opened." Brenda poured every ounce of her anger and pain into that form. She detailed Nia's character, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, her gentle nature. She described the horrific injuries she had witnessed. She questioned the impossible official narrative. She demanded the body cam footage maintenance records for the cameras and the personnel files for Officers Miller and Rodriguez. She submitted the form and waited. A week later, a thin envelope arrived in the mail. It was a letter from Chief of Police Thomas Bannon. The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic doublespeak. It offered condolences for her daughter's unfortunate medical situation, but stated that an initial review had found that Officers Miller and Rodriguez had acted in accordance with departmental policy and training. The case was considered closed. The audacity of it, the sheer unmitigated gall, left Brenda breathless. Closed. They hadn't spoken to her. They hadn't interviewed a single potential witness. They had simply investigated themselves, and to no one's surprise found themselves innocent. Brenda called a lawyer, a man named Henderson, who had been recommended by a friend. He was sharp and sympathetic, but his words were discouraging. "Brenda," These cases are incredibly difficult to win, he explained over the phone. The doctrine of qualified immunity provides a huge shield for police officers. Without a smoking gun like clear body cam footage showing misconduct, it's their word against, well, in this case, Naya is in a coma, so it's their word against nothing. The city will fight this tooth and nail. It could take years and cost a fortune, with a very low chance of success. The legal system, the very institution designed to provide justice, was another closed door. But Henderson's words, meant to temper her expectations, had the opposite effect. They ignited a new fire within her. If the system wouldn't help her, she would go around it. She would become the smoking gun. Her quest began in the neighborhood where Naya had been attacked. It was a quiet, working-class area, a mix of modest single-family homes and low-rise apartment buildings. Brenda printed flyers with Nia's picture, a bright, smiling school photo. "Were you a witness?" The headline screamed in bold black letters. "Did you see what happened to Brenda Jackson on the night of April 15th? She included her phone number and a new anonymous email address she had created. She went door to door, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Most people were polite, but unhelpful. They had seen nothing, heard nothing. Some doors remained shut. In a few, she saw a flicker of fear in the eyes of the person who answered. They would shake their heads, quickly muttering, "No, sorry," before closing the door a little too fast. The message was clear. Don't talk. Don't get involved. The Northgate PD had a long reach and a longer memory. The intimidation wasn't just implicit. One evening, as she was taping a flyer to a lamppost, a patrol car cruised slowly to a stop beside her. The officer in the passenger seat was Daniel Miller. Brenda recognized him instantly from the photos she had found online. He had a cruel, pinched face and pale, reptilian eyes. He didn't get out of the car. He just leaned his head out the window, a smirk playing on his lips. "You're wasting your time, Mrs. Jackson," he said, his voice oozing with condescending pity. "Go home, take care of your daughter." The unspoken threat was deafening. "We know who you are. We know where you live. Stop digging." The car pulled away, leaving Brenda standing on the dark street, her hands trembling. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her. For a fleeting moment, she considered his words. Maybe this was foolish. Maybe she was putting herself in danger. She looked at the flyer in her hand, at Naya's hopeful, trusting smile. The fear receded, replaced by a surge of protective fury. They were not just corrupt. They were bullies, preying on the weak and the frightened. They had picked the wrong woman to intimidate. She went back to her car, pulled out a fresh stack of flyers and a roll of tape. She would not be silenced. She would not be scared away. She would paper this entire city with her daughter's face if she had to. As she worked, a thought crystallized in her mind. Miller and Rodriguez were just the symptoms. The disease was the department itself, and the man at its head was Chief Bannon. To get justice for Naya, she had to understand the rot at the core, and for that, she needed a way inside. The flyers yielded nothing but frightened silence. The official channels were a dead end. Brenda realized she was fighting an enemy she couldn't see, a shadowy organization protected by laws, loyalty, and intimidation. If she was going to find a crack in their blue wall, she needed someone on the inside. Someone who knew the secrets. She spent her nights scouring online forums for disgruntled and retired police officers, reading through posts thick with jargon and bitterness. She was looking for a specific type of voice, not just angry, but righteous. Someone who had left the force not for a bigger pension, but because their conscience could no longer bear the weight. After weeks of searching, she found him. His username was Old Guard 78, and his posts on a private forum for law enforcement retirees were a mix of cynical commentary and thinly veiled disgust for the new breed of cops. He wrote about a time when the badge meant something, a standard that he felt had been eroded by corruption and politics. He never mentioned Northgate by name, but some of the details he alluded to, a tin pot chief with a god complex, a culture of cover-ups, were too specific to be a coincidence. Brenda crafted her message carefully. She didn't reveal her identity. She simply presented the official version of Naya's story and asked a hypothetical question. How could something like this happen? How could two officers with a history of complaints still be on the street? How could a department justify a technical difficulty with both body cameras at the exact same time? The reply came 2 days later. It was short and cryptic. They have guardians. Brenda's fingers flew across the keyboard. Guardians. What do you mean? Meet me, the reply said. Wednesday, 2 p.m. The Oakwood Diner on Route 4. Come alone. The Oakwood Diner was a relic, a classic slice of Americana with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. Brenda slid into a booth in the back corner. Her nerves frayed. A few minutes later, a man entered. He was in his late 50s with a weathered face, a slight limp, and eyes that had seen too much. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he ambled over and slid into the opposite side of the booth. You're the one from the forum, he said. It wasn't a question. My name is Frank Kowalski. Brenda Jackson, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. My daughter is Nia. Frank's face softened for a fraction of a second. I know. I'm sorry about your girl. I read about it. Knew the official story was bullshit the second I saw it. He had been a Northgate cop for 25 years. He'd retired 3 years ago. Disability pension for a shot-up knee and a sickened soul, as he put it. He leaned forward, his voice low. You asked about guardians. In Northgate, there's an inner circle, a fraternity. They call themselves the Aegis Guard, Aegis like the shield of Zeus, arrogant bastards. It started years ago, supposedly, to protect good cops from frivolous lawsuits. But it morphed into something else. It's a protection racket for the corrupt. Chief Bannon is the gatekeeper. You get in by proving your loyalty. And loyalty means doing what you're told, no questions asked, and keeping your mouth shut. He explained that Officers Miller and Rodriguez were not just cops, they were Bannon's Rottweilers. Miller was a true believer, a sadist who enjoyed the power. Rodriguez was younger, more of a follower, desperate for the approval of the inner circle. They're Bannon's enforcers, Frank said, stirring his coffee. They do his dirty work. Intimidation, roughing people up, planting evidence. In return, Bannon and the Aegis Guard make sure their complaints disappear. Internal affairs. Murphy, the guy you met. He's Bannon's lapdog. The technical difficulties with the body cams, standard operating procedure. Any stop that might look bad, the cameras magically malfunction. There's a kill switch. Not every officer has it. Only the trusted few. The scope of the corruption was more profound, more organized than Brenda had ever imagined. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was the entire orchard poisoned from the root. Why are you telling me this? Brenda asked, searching his weary eyes. Frank took a long sip of his coffee. I was a cop a long time, Mrs. Jackson. I saw things. I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have. Told myself I was one of the good guys, that I could make a difference from the inside. but I was just fooling myself. I saw what Bannon was turning the department into. This thing with your daughter, it's the last straw. I've got a granddaughter Nia's age." He told her that proving any of this would be next to impossible. The Aegis Guard was insular. Their records were non-existent, their oaths sworn in secret. But he offered her a thread, a single tantalizing loose end. "Bannon's clean on paper," Frank said. "Lives in a modest house, drives a Ford. But he has expensive tastes. There are rumors, whispers about a slush fund money skimmed from asset forfeitures. Drug busts where only half the cash gets logged into evidence. It's the one place he might be vulnerable. He's greedy, and greed makes people sloppy." He also gave her another piece of information, one that made her blood run cold. There was a third officer at the scene the night Nia was attacked. A rookie named Peterson, the same officer who had spoken to her at the hospital. "He wasn't part of the stop," Frank explained. "He was on patrol nearby and arrived just as it ended. He's not in the Aegis Guard. Bannon probably had him file a supplemental report that backed up the official story. The kid would have been terrified to do anything else. But he saw what happened. I guarantee it. And a rookie's body cam is less likely to have a malfunction. If that footage exists, it could blow the whole thing wide open." Brenda left the diner with a renewed sense of purpose. Frank had given her a roadmap. The corruption had a name, Aegis Guard. The motive had a name, greed. And there was a potential witness, a terrified rookie, and a piece of evidence that the department would have done anything to bury. A piece of evidence that Brenda would now do anything to find. Frank's information was a double-edged sword. It gave Brenda targets Bannon's finances, Officer Peterson's phantom bodycam footage, but she had no legal power to pursue them. She couldn't subpoena bank records or file a formal request for evidence that the department claimed didn't exist. She was still an outsider, a citizen banging on the locked doors of a corrupt institution. She needed a battering ram. She found it in the form of Jessica Riley. Jessica was a young, fiercely ambitious reporter for the Northgate Chronicle, a local paper that had seen better days. Brenda had seen her byline on a few hard-hitting articles about city council mismanagement and zoning disputes. She was hungry, and she wasn't afraid to step on toes. Brenda sent her an anonymous email, the same way she had contacted Frank, laying out the bare bones of the conspiracy, a secret society within the NPPD, a slush fund, and a cover-up of a brutal assault on a teenage girl. They met in a noisy coffee shop, a place chosen by Jessica for its anonymity and lack of ambiance. Jessica was all sharp angles and restless energy, her eyes scanning, analyzing her pen, poised over her notebook. She listened to Brenda's story with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply reassuring. She asked pointed, cynical questions, poking holes in the narrative, testing its strength. She was not offering sympathy. She was vetting a source. "Secret societies and killer cops," Jessica said, tapping her pen on the table. "It sounds like a bad movie script. You have proof?" "I have a source," Brenda replied evenly, "a retired 25-year veteran of the force, and I have my daughter lying in a coma. The proof is in the records the department is hiding, Bannon's financials, asset forfeiture logs, and the bodycam footage from the third officer on the scene, Officer Peterson." Jessica's skepticism began to melt away, replaced by the unmistakable gleam of a reporter who smells a career-making story. "If this is true, this is big. Pulitzer big." She agreed to help, but with a condition. "My editor won't let me run with this based on the word of an anonymous ex-cop. We need something concrete, a document, a recording, something they can't deny." The ball was back in Brenda's court. She contacted Frank. "We need proof," she told him. "Something to give the reporter." Frank was hesitant. Brenda, if I get caught, it's not just my pension. These guys play for keeps. I know, Brenda said, her voice soft but unyielding. Frank, they have my daughter. What choice do I have? Her desperation resonated with his own buried guilt. A few days later, he called her. I might have something, he said. It's not the smoking gun, but it's a bullet. There was a partial audio file. It came from Peterson's camera. The video was corrupted, of course, but a snippet of audio got uploaded to the server before someone could erase it. It was buried in a miscellaneous evidence folder, mislabeled. I found a reference to it in an old IT ticket. If I can get a friend in the evidence locker to pull it, I might be able to get you a copy. The wait was agonizing. Every waking moment was spent either at the hospital where Naya's condition remained unchanged, or staring at her phone, willing it to ring. Finally, a week later, Frank called. I have it. It's not much, just a few seconds, but it's something. They met at a secluded park bench after dark. Frank, looking more haggard than ever, slipped a small USB drive into her hand. Don't let this be traced back to me, Brenda. Please. Brenda raced home, her hands shaking as she plugged the drive into her laptop. She clicked on the single audio file. The quality was poor, full of static and muffled sounds. But behind the noise, she could hear voices. First, she heard Officer Miller's voice, sharp and angry. Stay down. You hear me? Stay down. Then a younger voice panicked. It had to be Officer Peterson. Dan, that's enough. Jesus, you're gonna kill her. A thud, a sickening, wet sound. Then Miller again, his voice dangerously low. You didn't see anything. Your camera wasn't working. Understand. A moment of silence, then Peterson's voice, barely a whisper. Yeah, I understand. The audio cut out. It was only 16 seconds long. But it was everything. It was the crack in the wall. It contradicted the official report in every conceivable way. It proved Peterson was there. It proved Naya was not the aggressor. It proved Miller was violent and out of control. And most importantly, it proved a cover-up, a direct order to lie. Brenda immediately sent the file to Jessica Riley. The reporter called her back within minutes, her voice electric with excitement. Oh my God, Jessica said. Oh my God, Brenda, we've got them. This is it. They can't spin this. They can't ignore this. The chief will have to respond. While Jessica and her editor prepared the story using the audio as the bombshell lead, she put her research team to work on the other angle Frank had provided Chief Bannon's finances. Armed with the knowledge that he was likely hiding something, they started digging, not into his official salary, but into the flow of money around him. They cross-referenced asset forfeiture records with drug bust reports, looking for discrepancies. They looked at the business dealings of his known associates, his friends, his family. The audio file was the spark, but Brenda and Jessica were about to pour gasoline on the fire. The whispers from the walls had become a shout, and soon the whole city would hear it. Jessica Riley's story hit the Northgate Chronicle's front page like a thunderclap. The headline, stark and accusatory, was splayed above a grainy photo of Chief Bannon. Secret recording contradicts police account in teens beating. You're gonna kill her, fellow officer heard saying. The article was a masterwork of controlled fury. It laid out the official narrative and then systematically dismantled it with the 16-second audio file. The transcript of the recording was printed in bold, a damning testament to the violence and the subsequent cover-up. The article named Officers Miller and Rodriguez, and for the first time, publicly mentioned Officer Peterson as a witness. It spoke of a blue wall of silence and posed pointed questions directly to Chief Bannon about the integrity of his department and the miraculous, simultaneous failure of 2 body cameras. The city exploded. The story was picked up by state and national news outlets. Protesters organized seemingly overnight gathered outside the Northgate Municipal Building, holding signs with Naya's face on them and chanting "Justice for Naya." The pressure on Bannon was immense and immediate. He held a press conference, his face a mask of practiced indignation. He dismissed the audio as unverified, contextless, and inadmissible, a cowardly leak by a disgruntled former employee. He announced that Peterson had been placed on administrative leave for his own safety, and that internal affairs would open a full and transparent investigation into the leak. It was a classic move: deflect, deny, and investigate the whistleblower, not the crime. But it was too late. Jessica and Brenda had lit a fire they could no longer control. While Bannon was busy with damage control, Jessica's research team struck gold. The tip from Frank about asset forfeiture had been the key. For years, the Northgate PD had been seizing cash and property during drug raids. Legally, this money was supposed to go through a complex legal process, with a portion eventually returning to the city's general fund. Bannon had found a loophole. Working with a friendly city attorney, he had set up a complex web of discretionary funds and private contractors. The paper trail was a labyrinth designed to be impenetrable. But Jessica's team, which now included a forensic accountant, found a pattern. Large sums of forfeiture money were being paid to a handful of LLCs for services rendered, things like specialized training, equipment maintenance, and community outreach. These LLCs, however, were little more than shell corporations, and when the accountant finally peeled back the layers of ownership she found, they all led to one man, a prominent local businessman named Robert Thompson. Thompson was a pillar of the Northgate community. He owned car dealerships, sponsored youth sports leagues, and sat on the board of several local charities. He was also Chief Bannon's closest friend. The investigation revealed that Thompson's shell companies would receive huge payments from the police department's forfeiture funds. A few days later, a nearly identical amount of money would be transferred from one of Thompson's accounts into a private investment fund. The fund's primary beneficiary, Thomas Bannon. It was a classic money laundering scheme, elegant in its simplicity. Bannon and Thompson were skimming millions of dollars from drug money seized by the police. The Aegis Guard wasn't just a secret society for covering up brutality. It was the enforcement arm of a criminal enterprise. The officers who were part of the Guard were rewarded for their loyalty, not just with protection, but with cash bonuses paid out of a slush fund managed by Thompson. Their job was to keep the product, the seized cash, flowing, and to terrorize anyone in the community who might dare to speak out. Naya wasn't attacked because she was a suspect. She was attacked because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, a random target for 2 of Bannon's thugs to make an example of, to maintain the climate of fear that allowed their criminal operation to flourish. Brenda felt a chilling sense of clarity. This was never just about 2 rogue cops. It was about an entire system built on greed and violence, orchestrated by the man at the very top. Jessica prepared a follow-up story, one that would connect the dots between the brutal assault on Naya and the multi-million-dollar racketeering scheme. She had documents, bank records, and a clear money trail. It was enough to bring down not just a police chief, but an entire city administration. As she was finalizing the article, she received an anonymous encrypted email. The sender claimed to be a friend of Officer Frank Rodriguez. The message was short and desperate. "Frankie is falling apart. He's terrified. Miller is threatening him, saying they'll all go down together. He wants to talk. He says he has more than just the audio. He has everything. A meeting was arranged. Brenda and Jessica agreed to meet Rodriguez at a discreet location. He was their star witness, the man who could corroborate the audio, expose the Aegis Guard, and testify about the racketeering from the inside. He was the key to unlocking the entire conspiracy. The night before the meeting, however, Brenda's phone rang. It was a hysterical Jessica. "Brenda, turn on the news," she choked out. Brenda's heart hammered against her ribs as she fumbled for the remote. A local news anchor was reporting live. "Breaking news out of Northgate." The anchor said, her face grim. "Police are on the scene at the home of Officer Frank Rodriguez, who was found dead just hours ago from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Officer Rodriguez was recently implicated in the leak of a controversial audio recording related to the case of..." Brenda dropped the phone. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. They had gotten to him. Their star witness, their hope for justice was gone. Bannon and his cronies had silenced him forever. The official story of Officer Frank Rodriguez's death was a masterpiece of clinical deception, a narrative swiftly constructed and ruthlessly enforced by Chief Bannon. The Northgate PD, in a stark conflict of interest, investigated itself and declared the case closed. Suicide. A man buckling under personal pressures. Bannon's televised statement was a performance of somber gravitas, a final act of disrespect to the man he'd had executed. He spoke of tragedy and loss, all while knowing he was the author of it. For Brenda and Jessica, the news was a physical blow. Their star witness, the one man who could tear down the wall from the inside, had been silenced. A deep, chilling fear settled in. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. It was about murder. The Aegis Guard had shown they would do anything to protect their king. For a few bleak, desperate days, it felt as though Bannon had won. But Bannon and Miller, in their arrogance, had failed to account for the corrosive nature of their own crimes. The pact that bound them, once a source of strength, was now a shared liability, tainted with blood. The pressure began to eat at them, not from the outside, but from within. The first to break was the one who had always relied on brute force over brains, Officer Daniel Miller. Miller the enforcer was now a man besieged. His swagger had evaporated, replaced by a raw, paranoid anxiety. He saw accusing eyes everywhere, in the grocery store, at the gas station, in the faces of strangers on the street. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams filled with the sounds of Nia's bones breaking and the sight of Rodriguez's panicked face. He started drinking not for pleasure, but for oblivion, starting in the morning, and not stopping until he passed out. His temper, always a lit fuse, was now a constant explosion. One night at a dimly lit cop bar, a place that was once his sanctuary, a drunk civilian recognized him from the news. "Hey, you're that guy," the man slurred, pointing a wobbly finger. "You're the one who beat up that little girl." Miller's reaction was instantaneous and feral. He launched himself over the table, his fists flying, a torrent of rage and fear erupting from him. It took two of his Aegis Guard cronies to pull him off, the man bundling him out the back door, before the uniformed police, the ones not in on the conspiracy, could arrive. He was becoming a reckless, dangerous liability, and the whispers began even among his protectors. What Miller didn't know was that Frank Rodriguez, in his final terrified days, had seen his own death coming. Consumed by a guilt that had become a physical ailment, and stalked by the certainty that Bannon would never allow him to testify, Rodriguez had taken out an insurance policy. For 3 sleepless nights, he sat at his kitchen table. The glow of the laptop screen illuminating his haggard face. He typed everything. He chronicled the formation of the Aegis Guard, the mechanics of the racketeering scheme, the way Bannon and Thompson laundered the money from seized assets. He gave a visceral minute-by-minute account of the attack on Brenda Jackson, admitting his own cowardice in failing to stop Miller. Most damningly, he documented the threats. He transcribed the chilling phone call from Miller. "You keep your mouth shut, Frankie. You hear me? We're all in this together. You try to play the hero, and your family's going to be picking you up in a body bag." He recounted how Bannon had pulled him aside, his voice a silky menace, promising protection if he stayed loyal, but implying a swift and terrible alternative if he wavered. This document was his confession, his last will and testament, and his revenge. He printed 2 copies, sealed them in thick envelopes, and drove to a town 30 miles away. He mailed 1 copy to a P.O. box he'd rented under a false name. The key to that box he sent via overnight courier to his sister in Ohio, a woman he trusted implicitly, with a note scrawled on a napkin. "If you hear I'm dead, give the key to this box to the reporter Jessica Riley at the North Gate Chronicle. Don't trust anyone else. I love you." When Rodriguez's sister saw the news report of her brother's suicide, she felt a cold certainty grip her. She didn't cry. She got in her car and drove for 5 hours straight. She walked into the Chronicle's office, asked for Jessica Riley, and handed her the key and the note. "My brother didn't kill himself," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "He was murdered. Everything you need to prove it is in that box." Brenda and Jessica met at Brenda's apartment to open the package. The document was 22 pages long. They read it together in stunned silence, Rodriguez's voice rising from the grave calm, detailed and utterly convincing. It was all there, every dirty secret, every crime, every name. It was more than a smoking gun. It was an arsenal. Armed with Rodriguez's ghost, Jessica wrote the story of her life. The headline was an earthquake. Dead officer's secret statement accuses Chief Bannon of murder and racketeering. She quoted his final words, his fear of Miller, his indictment of Bannon. The story didn't just suggest a cover-up, it laid out a criminal conspiracy and a murder plot in horrifying detail. The city, already simmering with outrage, boiled over. The state attorney general, who had been cautiously circling the case, was forced to act, announcing a full-scale state investigation. The FBI, seeing clear evidence of interstate financial crimes and murder, officially took jurisdiction. The news report, featuring his own words predicting his death, was the final straw for Daniel Miller. He saw the net closing, saw Bannon preparing to cut him loose and feed him to the wolves. His survival instinct, the only code he truly lived by, screamed at him to run. He frantically threw clothes and stacks of cash into a duffel bag, his hands shaking so badly he could barely zip it. He didn't have a plan. He just drove. His flight was clumsy and pathetic. The all-points bulletin went out within an hour. Using his credit card at a gas station was his first mistake. His car, a conspicuous muscle car, was spotted by a state trooper an hour later. He was cornered at a grimy bus station 3 towns away, trying to buy a one-way ticket to anywhere. When the agents approached him, he didn't even try to fight. The look on his face was one of utter defeat. In a sterile interrogation room under the cold, bright lights and the relentless, quiet pressure of federal agents, Daniel Miller collapsed. Stripped of his badge, his power and his protectors, he was just a terrified bully. The agents didn't need to threaten him. They just laid out the evidence, the audio Rodriguez's statement, the murder charge, waiting for him. He started crying, great heaving sobs of self-pity. And then he started talking. The words poured out of him in a desperate, frantic flood. He gave them everything. He described the Aegis Guard initiation rites, the money laundering, the staged suicides of other problems over the years. He gave them a detailed second-by-second confession to the assault on Brenda Jackson. And to save himself from a lethal injection, he gave them his chief, his mentor, his king. He told them exactly how Bannon had ordered the hit on Rodriguez, who had carried it out, and how they had staged the scene. Coma, Brenda would later reflect, wasn't a sudden strike of lightning. It was a slow, meticulous accounting. It was the weight of each individual sin accumulating until the structure of lies became so heavy it could do nothing but collapse in on itself. Miller's brutality had led to Rodriguez's guilt. Rodriguez's guilt had led to his murder. And his murder had led directly to Miller's own panicked, pathetic downfall. The dominoes had all fallen but one. And now, thanks to Miller's confession, the FBI was on its way to topple the king himself. The dawn broke over Northgate with a deceptive calm, the sky painted in soft hues of pink and orange. But on the ground, a storm was breaking. Just as the city began to stir, a convoy of dark SUVs and unmarked cars descended upon the Northgate Municipal Building. The doors of the vehicles opened in unison, and dozens of federal agents clad in tactical vests with FBI emblazoned in bold yellow letters poured out. Their movements were swift, silent, and methodical. This wasn't an investigation. It was an occupation. They breached the doors of the police department with a battering ram, the sound echoing through the quiet morning like a gunshot. The few officers on the overnight shift were stunned into submission, their hands raised before the agents even issued a command. Some looked terrified. Others, the ones not part of the inner circle, wore expressions of quiet, grim satisfaction. The reign of the Aegis Guard was over. The agents, armed with a federal warrant that ran hundreds of pages long, began the systematic dismantling of Bannon's kingdom. They seized servers from the IT department, confiscated computers, and cleared out the evidence locker. Their primary target being the asset forfeiture records that had been the source of Bannon's illicit wealth. Chief Thomas Bannon was already in his office. He had been there all night, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of dread since Miller's arrest. He was shredding documents when the door to his office burst open. A tall, stern-faced FBI agent stepped inside, flanked by two others. Bannon. The man who had instilled fear with a single glance looked up, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. "Thomas Bannon," the lead agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for violations of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and multiple civil rights violations." Bannon tried to summon his old arrogance. "You have no authority here. This is my department." The agent simply held up the warrant, a thick document that represented the culmination of Brenda's pain, Frank's guilt, and Jessica's relentless digging. "According to the United States government," the agent replied coldly, "this is now a federal crime scene." As they pulled his hands behind his back, the satisfying click of the handcuffs locking into place was a sound of finality. Bannon's eyes darted around the office that had been his throne, the polished desk, the plaques on the wall, the framed photo of him with the governor. All of it was meaningless now. As they led him through the squad room, a gauntlet of his own stunned officers and impassive federal agents, the mask of defiance finally crumbled. He looked like what he was, a criminal caught in the act, his reign of terror at an ignominious end. The cameras flashed relentlessly, as he was placed in the back of a federal vehicle, his pathetic exit broadcast for the entire world to see. Simultaneously, another team of agents arrived at the pristine gates of a private golf course. They found Robert Thompson on the 9th green, lining up a putt. His arrest amidst the manicured lawns and bewildered wealthy patrons was a scene of surreal comedy. The pillar of the community, the generous benefactor, was revealed to be nothing more than a common crook. By lunchtime, more than a dozen members of the Aegis Guard, from patrol officers to lieutenants, had been taken into custody. The web of corruption so carefully woven over years had been torn apart in a matter of hours. Brenda was in her usual vigil by Naya's bedside when her phone buzzed. It was Jessica, her voice breathless and triumphant. "Turn on the TV, Brenda. Turn it on, right now. We did it. You did it." Brenda fumbled for the remote, her heart pounding. The screen was filled with images of the raid of Bannon's perp, walk of Thompson being led away from his golf cart. It was real. The towering monolith of corruption that had seemed so invincible was actually falling. Tears, hot and cathartic, streamed down her face. A wave of relief so profound it left her weak washed over her. It was the first time she had cried from something other than grief or rage in months. She sank into the visitor's chair, the sound of the news report a triumphant symphony, and wept until she was empty. She must have drifted off exhausted by the emotional release. When she opened her eyes, the afternoon sun was streaming into the room. She felt a strange stillness, a sense of peace that had been absent for so long. She turned to look at Naya, as she always did, her heart giving its familiar ache. But something was different. A flicker, the faintest flutter of an eyelid. Brenda sat bolt upright, her breath catching in her throat. "Nia," she whispered, leaning closer. "Nia, honey. Can you hear me?" Nia's brow furrowed slightly. Her lips parted, and a low, guttural sound, the first she had made in months, escaped. Her fingers, which Brenda had been holding on to for dear life, tightened their grip with a barely perceptible pressure. Brenda's heart exploded with a hope so fierce it felt like pain. She squeezed back, tears welling in her eyes once more. "Nia, it's Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here. Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." And then, miraculously, she felt it. A definite, conscious squeeze. Her daughter was there. She was coming back. Brenda looked up through her tears at the smiling face of the nurse who had just entered the room. The long, dark night was finally over. The dawn was here. The legal proceedings that followed were a public spectacle. The trials of Bannon and his cronies dominated the news for months. The prosecution, armed with Miller's damning testimony, Rodriguez's posthumous confession, and a mountain of financial and forensic evidence, was unstoppable. Bannon, convicted of murder racketeering and a litany of other charges, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thompson received a similar fate. Miller, for his cooperation, was given a 20-year sentence. The other members of the Aegis Guard received varying prison terms, their careers and reputations permanently destroyed. The Northgate Police Department was disbanded. An outside agency was brought in to rebuild the city's law enforcement from the ground up, with new leadership, new training protocols, and a civilian oversight committee with Brenda Jackson as its first chairperson. Naya's recovery was a testament to her own strength and her mother's unwavering dedication. It was a slow, arduous process of relearning and rebuilding, but every small victory, her first word, her first step, her first laugh, was a celebration. A year later, Brenda stood before a crowd of reporters and supporters, announcing the launch of the Brenda Jackson Foundation for Police Accountability. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a leader, a powerful voice for change. Her personal tragedy had been forged into a public crusade. Later that evening, she sat with Naya on their front porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. Naya, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder, was talking about her plans to re-enroll in school. "You know, Mum," Nia said softly, her voice still a little fragile, but full of life. "I don't remember what happened. The doctors say maybe it's for the best." Brenda wrapped an arm around her daughter. "Maybe it is," she said. "But what matters is that we remember what came after. We remember that we fought back. We remember that we won." Looking at her daughter's face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, Brenda felt a profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. The monsters had been vanquished. Justice hard won and dearly paid for had finally prevailed. And her daughter, her beautiful, resilient Naya, was home safe in her arms. It was the only victory that had ever truly mattered. The story of Brenda and Brenda Jackson is a stark reminder that the fight for justice is often a marathon, not a sprint. It's a testament to the incredible power of a single person, a grieving mother who refused to accept the lies of those in power. She faced down a corrupt system armed with nothing but the truth and a love for her child that knew no bounds. Her victory wasn't just for Nia. It was for every person who has ever been wronged by a system designed to protect itself. If their story moved you, please like this video and share it with your friends and family. These stories need to be heard, and to ensure you don't miss our next investigation into the truth, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening.